losing grounds to major international currencies such as the dollar, the pounds, sterling. Now, the cedi has depreciated against the dollar from 4.9 Ghana cedis to over 5.6 Ghana cedis since the turn-off of the year, sparking concern in the business community, among others. And to help us discuss this particular very thorny, dicey, in-biting topic of the depreciation of the cedi, is no other man. Look, this man, he speaks into it, he speaks into the economy, and I'm talking that no other person than Dr. Ebenezer Ashley. He's a chartered economist and a financial consultant. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm fine.
All right. I know this issue eats into your fiber. But my very first question to you this morning is,
yes.
Doc.
Yes.
Do you think the cedi is losing its oxygen?
Thank you very much. First, I'll say good morning to your cherished viewers. That's an interesting question, a close-ended one, which requires yes or no answer. But I would like to transform it into an open-ended question, because the immediate response will require some form of explanation. The cedi, to some extent, is losing some part of its general or total oxygen and needs to be refilled so that it will regain its lost strength and gather its complete strength that would require of it. So yes, to a very large extent, given the happenings, you just mentioned that it used to be 4 cedis 90 pesos. Now we're talking about an official rate of about 5 cedis 60 pesos. So within a short space of time, we have about 70 peso increase in the total amount of cedi you would require for $1. You know, and therefore, on the basis of this, it will be out of place to say that the cedi does not require to refill its oxygen, you know, and make sure it is able to work as expected. So yes, to some extent, there is the need for a review of the current or existing measures that are in a way contributing to the free fall of the cedi at this particular point in time. The measures we've talked about, we're going to
so
have the opportunity.
Moving on to the next question.
Yes.
What is accounting for this depreciation? What's happening? Tell us the truth.
As you speak the truth, nothing but the truth. Right? Thank you very much. As I've mentioned time and again, what is happening is actually not depreciation of the cedi. It is fall in value of the cedi, because whenever a currency depreciates, then it's a deliberate attempt by the government of any jurisdiction to reduce the value of the currency, to ease trading activities with other countries. So a case in point is the recent deliberate fall in value of the Chinese renminbi, or the yuan, by the Chinese government. It is intended to attract various countries to China for buying of goods and services. So if it is a deliberate attempt, then it's depreciation. But when the interactions of the market compel the value of a currency to fall, then we say there's a fall in value of the cedi. But this is just by the way, because a currency cannot fall up to 100% and above and remain in circulation. When it depreciates up to 100% and above, it has to be recalled and a new currency introduced. You know, so yes, that is why it is not a depreciation but then a fall in value. But to ease explanation, I'm sure the layperson appreciates depreciation more than fall in value. Yes, so several factors account for this. First, I would look at this particular situation. You know, since independence, 1957, for the 7-year running after independence, the nation was fortunate to have had development projects taking place without necessarily borrowing, because the colonial masters left some amount of money in the coffers, and this made it somewhat easier for the first president of the land to embark on development projects with little recourse to borrowing. However, from the 8th year and beyond, you realize the funds were somewhat depleted, and there was the need for borrowing. So since 1958 till date, Ghana has been prone and susceptible to borrowing from the multilateral institutions. And this is what happens. In some cases, you have 20-year loan, 10-year loan, 15 10-year loan. This has been part and parcel of us, especially from the beginning of the Fourth Republic till date. And therefore, every year looks as if we have a loan that is due for payment by the government of the day, irrespective of who is in power. And in some cases, because of the variation in the number of years, and in some cases you have for 20 years, in some cases 5 years, in some cases 3 years. It even got to a time where the previous administration was even borrowing for 2 years. And so even a year, you have about 2 or 3 loans that are due for payment. Then the nation requires substantial amount of money to pay off. Now, for most of the loans that we've contracted as a nation, they are concluded in dollars. Irrespective of the jurisdiction, they are concluded in dollars. So when it is time to repay, the government is compelled, is under obligation.
No, sorry to cut your thoughts, but just quickly to ask a question before you go on.
Yes.
These loans that are to be repaid in short term, like 2 years, some in 3 years, is it good to go for such short term loans for repayment? I mean, do we need to do that? And what makes us do that?
Yes, thank you very much. That I have explained time and again. So it's just to recap briefly, it was out of place because it puts undue pressure on the economy. That is what we call borrowing short to pay short. It is not appropriate. When you borrow short, it means you borrow for a short period of time to pay an immediate debt. And so by the time you try to focus on new development projects, the debt that you contracted is due for payment. So you would have to focus on it. So the current administration came in and then revised the strategy from borrowing long to pay short. So what it means is that you borrow and allow yourself about 5 years or more so that you heave some side of financial relief and be able to focus on developmental projects. So that wasn't the best strategy. It was putting undue pressure on us. When you contract the loan, the funds you mobilize immediately must go into repayment of the loan. And that wasn't helping us. So it's just by the way. And so we have the debts. In some cases, because of the short term and some long term, they may all come due in the same year. Now, when this happens, because they are in dollars, the government is under obligation to repay back the loans in dollars. Now, you consider the fact that dollar is not our main currency. We are able to attract it through transactions. And therefore, if the conditions in the international market are not conducive and favorable enough to allow us to rake in more dollars, then we have a challenge on hand, even at the governmental level. Now, besides that, you also realize that even though we lift crude oil here, we still import the refined one to ease the utilization of petrol, the diesel, kerosene, the gas in the country. Now, this also, we have the dollar as the major currency denominator in the transaction process. And it's no making of the government of Ghana, because the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, has resorted to the use of dollar as the common currency for transactions. Some are even considering the use of Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency, which is very high in value as well. So we on the government side, we have these challenges. Now, you also realize that the decision to end the extended credit facility agreement with the IMF is also creating some amount of panic, among the investor community. For some of the debts that we've talked about, fortunately for us in time past, because of the strong belief in the economy, because of the rating by Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch, and also Trading Economics to a very large extent, most of these investors resort to roll over. In other words, when it is due to recoup their investment, they allow the investment to be reinvested in the economy. So the pressure on the government to pay back the debt eases. But here's the case, because in April, the government is christened to end the extended credit facility agreement. Some of these lenders want their money back. So there's pressure on the government, first, to meet the debt obligation. Second, must make dollars in millions available for the lifters of crude oil from overseas to come into the country. So in the case of our debt, when we have 2 or 3 coming due in the same year, then the government is compelled to look in some cases for about billions of dollars to pay off the debt, not millions. And you can just imagine, so there is pressure on the government on this particular end. Now, if you set this aside, you come into the general economic activities. As a nation, we have come to believe and appreciate the dynamics that government alone cannot provide. We need to to, in a way, stir up the private sector so that the contribution of the private sector to national development and growth would be more than we've ever recorded. And this, in a way, is brought into the expression that the private sector is the engine for the growth of the economy. Now the private sector comes in handy. We have people who go outside and then import goods and services to a very large extent into the country. Why? Simply because as of last year, the estimated population of Ghana is about 29.6 million, but I do say we are over 30 million. Now, if you consider those who are able to cross the borders through Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, in some cases through the Gulf of Guinea, the sea without documentation, you could tell that we are over 30 million. Unfortunately for us, bulk of the things that majority of the population requires, is imported into the country. And so there is always pressure on the cedi to be converted into a foreign currency. But the unfortunate situation for us here is that most of the countries our traders transact business with rely on the dollar for the imported products, and this is where we have a challenge.
No, before you go on, in terms of transactions, you go to certain countries, you can't use the dollar there. You have to change the currency of the country before you can do some transactions. Are we looking in that line? Are we trying to, would we maybe in the near future toll those lines? Because I'm sure it's going to help. So why are we not doing that? Why are certain countries being able to do that, even within Africa? Why can't we do this?
Well, thank you very much. Your question is a laudable one. Let me explain. You're talking about, there are two ways to this. Let's draw this analogy. It's just like someone traveling from, say, Togo to Ghana with SEFA. It may be difficult for the person to walk to Katamanto and then say, I want to buy an item with the SEFA. First, the person will have to visit the nearest forest bureau, exchange the SEFA for the cedi, to ease the transaction process in the market. So that is the first aspect of it. It is the same everywhere. And therefore, even if someone comes in here with dollars, it may be difficult to buy items with it directly. You may have to convert the dollar into cedi before you engage in trading activities. But you're talking about what we call dollarization of an economy, where the country's main currency is recognized for transaction purposes, but then a foreign currency, notably the dollar, is allowed to also participate in trading activities. That is what most countries are frowning on, so that they do not weaken their currency. And that actually was introduced here in 2015. You realize, if you look at the diagram carefully, you realize in 2014 we had a steep fall in value of the cedi relative to the dollar, more than it has ever occurred in the past 5 or 6 years. And in the following year, what was the remedy, the immediate remedial solution adopted by the then government? It was to put an end to dollarization of Ghanaian economy. That is, people selling homes in dollars, people renting apartment, hotels, guest houses in dollars, pay the collection of fees in dollars. These were ended. And even there was a cap on the amount of dollars, 10,000, that traders could take on them overseas. Anything in excess had to be sent or wired through the bank. So these measures were put in place. There was a policy, there was an announcement, there were advertisements on national television to that effect. And this policy has not officially ended. What it means is that it is still in effect. Yes, it has not ended because the previous administration did not announce its end before exiting office. The current administration has officially not announced the end of the policy initiated by the previous administration. What it means is that it is still in effect, but the implementation is what perhaps is a bit of a challenge. So you are right. Now, from what you're saying, as a matter of fact, when this issue cropped up, last year we talked about it, a few days later, the Bank of Ghana announced immediate measures with regards to the regulation, and that is making sure that the various forest bureaus in the country require of the exchanges some form of ID, and the various forms of acceptable ID were announced. So as we speak, if you go to a forest bureau to exchange money, it is required that first you tender in your ID for verification. You indicate what you intend to use the currency for. And if it is not cogent within the lines of the stipulations of the Bank of Ghana, the forest bureau is not supposed to exchange the money for you. So this immediate measure has been put in place, but its effective implementation relies on you and I.
Okay.
You know, if we are to help in that particular regard, then we would help also stabilize the Cedi relative to the major foreign currencies. So what you're saying is true. It is curbing dollarization of the economy. That is what is witnessed in other parts.
Okay.
In South Africa, which was cited as an example, and the Bank of Ghana moved in swiftly. You know, over there to exchange the currency, there will be so many requirements, documentation, intended to not encourage people to toe that particular line. Our Ghanaian example is the repatriation of currency, you know, to another country. The fees are intended to discourage that particular initiative. So we need to adapt it in the forex market as well, so that we'll be able to have some sort of financial respite. Now, with regards to the courses, we are on it. If you allow me to end quickly. So with our traders, now research has proven that for the past 4 years, this is the 5th year, Ghana's leading trading partner is China. You know, and China's currency is the renminbi or the yuan. You know, so if China remains Ghana's largest trading partner,
and they're taking Africa by storm.
Yes, you know, China has the largest population in the world, over 1.4 billion people, followed by India with about 1.35 billion. Yes, the two nations alone command about 27% of the world's population. China and India, the two leading countries. You know, so it is not out of place to see that some nationals of, especially China, are seeking greener pastures elsewhere, because they may be quite a number for the country. You know, so it is true. It is a matter of a market penetration. That is what China is trying to embark on, and it is not out of place in the competitive global business environment.
Is that affecting the dollar?
Yes, it is. It is affecting the Cedi.
The Cedi.
It's affecting the Cedi. That's what we're coming to. You see, besides China, we also have United Arab Emirates, because of the ease in the acquisition of visa. We have most people also going there, and also South Korea for our spare parts. Most of the spare parts come from South Korea. In the case of China, you realize in 2016 the trade between the two countries was about 5.98 billion US dollars. You see, and as I mentioned earlier, it was not in good taste for the amount to be mentioned immediately in dollars. It should have first been in the Chinese yuan or the Cedi, and then we calculate the equivalent in dollars to determine how much trade took place between the two nations, because the dollar is not the main currency. As I mentioned time again, you also realize that the dollar is used by 17 countries and territories, including the United States. You know, they are the United States. You talk about East Timor, now called Timor-Leste. That's the French version of it. We have the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, you have the Guam, the American Samoa, you have Palau, you have the British Virgin Islands, you know, Johnston, Ecuador, Puerto Rico, you also have the El Salvador, all of this. Now, for the 17 countries and territories, none of them, all right, includes China, United Arab Emirates, and then the South Korea. So we have the opportunity to remedy the situation without even immediate government initiative. You know, yes. So if we trade more with China, then our traders would have to resort to the use of a specific currency of China and not the dollar. You see, if you look at the situation of the dollar in more practical terms, those who are familiar with the acquisition of passports, the driver's license, we have people who call the Goro boys. You know, the dollar is now serving as a Goro boy in the transaction process, because it's an intermediary. Instead of going straight to the country's specific currency, we allow the dollar to come in before we engage in the transaction. And obviously, it increases the cost of the goods we eventually import into the country, and the eventual increase in the cost is passed on to the consumer. You know, and even if it were to be with the price of goods, they may be regulated in a way. But we realize it is also having an adverse toll on the demand for the dollar relative to the Cedi. So as we demand more dollars, an artificial shortage is created through speculators in the financial market, and so more Cedis will be required to obtain just $1.
Now, Doc, we have heard. I mean, do you think that government is eyeing funds from the Cocoa Board and to launch the $3 billion Eurobond to stabilize the Cedi. Do you think that will work? Now, just hold on to your answer. Let me announce the phone line. We want this to be interactive. So you're calling to 0302 770 222, 0302 770 222, 0302 770 so you can call in, give me your suggestion, ask Doc any question you want to ask. This is a matter of interest to all of us as citizenry. Right, so do you think this will work?
Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, the situation on hand requires about 4 different measures to resolve. We have the very short term, the short term, immediate, and the long term solutions. You know,
but now it looks like we're doing just short term.
We are doing.
Why are we just doing short term?
The announcement by the finance minister relates to the very short term.
Why?
No, because you need that immediately, at least to help arrest the situation. You know, before you look out for the short, which has to do with some of the measures we're talking about, the medium term, you know, which would also translate into stabilizing our transactions using.
Why don't we do things to last longer than rather doing in bits and pieces?
Very good. You see, unfortunately, the country is not more or less a private company, you know, which for which the owner may wake up a day and then be able to issue directives. It requires processes, and these processes must be documented so that, you know, future or subsequent leadership would also be able to follow. Where there are challenges, they could be referred to for remedial measures. You know, so that is where we have a problem on hand. Now, the announcement by the finance minister, some perceived it to be an end in itself, but it is not. I quickly had to look at the statement. It is one of the measures aimed at stemming the tide of the free fall of the Cedi is the acquisition of the extra funds, about 800 million, which will be added to the existing reserve to shore up to about $4 billion. You know, so what this means is that immediately, whilst some of the measures we talk about and the solutions we will discuss are put in place and effectively implemented, how do we ensure?
Doc, sorry to cut your thoughts. We have Kwesi from Sachet also. Kofi, hi Kofi.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, sir?
I am fine. How are you too?
We're good. We're very fine. Please go ahead.
I think we could have interim solutions, short-term solutions, and long-term solutions. I want to concentrate on these and dilate on them. In respect of the free fall of the Cedi, I think our repatriation policy, we need to take a second look at our repatriation policy. You go to some jurisdictions, you come to establish an industry in this country. For instance, these multinationals, when they earn income, they do not transfer the Cedi back to their countries. They transfer dollars into their country. What percentage of dollars are they allowed to send back to their countries? In our case, a greater chunk of the dollar percentage is sent back to their country. So we need to take a second look at our repatriation policy. Then our transfer policies. If you are in Ghana and you want to transfer money, for instance, to UK, and you are a UK citizen and want to transfer money back to your country, how many times are you allowed to transfer monies back to your country? We need to take a critical look at this policy. For instance, when we go to the Asian countries, if you want to transfer monies back to your country, you need to fill a form, you need to get clearance to enable you transfer the monies back into your country. So that is also another issue. Then we also need to look at our tax exemption policy. We are giving a whole lot of tax exemption to most of these multinational countries who will eventually, in the long run, use tax avoidance strategies, and they pay nothing to us. So in terms of revenue mobilization, we losing a greater chunk of revenue. In the circumstances, we will fall short of revenue, and the long-term event is that we will have to go for loan to be able to embark on our developmental projects. So we need to look at the tax exemption policy as well. Then we also need to look at our tax base.
All right,
we want to yes, please.
Okay, that should be your last point.
That should be my last point. We are dilating on a very important issue. So let me finish with my discussion.
Okay.
In the case of expanding our tax base, look at the informal sector. The mason, somebody who charge about 100 million building a house, they escape the tax net. So we need to take a critical look at the informal sector, taxation of the informal sector, so that we can be able to show a lot of revenue to the kitty. The final point that I want to make, I think I mentioned that long-term solution trajectory, the 1D, 1F, is be able to manufacture, produce what we eat ourselves over here and make use of it. Then there wouldn't be the need to do any importation anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kofi. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Now, Doug, you heard what Kofi said.
Yes. Let me.
You don't want to speak to that.
Yes.
Repatriation policy, transfer policies, our tax exemptions.
Yes. The first two could be lumped into one. Let me explain what's actually happening. It's just like the engaging in the manufacturing of a product, virtually new on the market. In some cases, what do? You provide samples for the passers-by to try, taste and see if the produce or the product you have is quite delicious, and then you realize the patronage begins to grow. It is at this particular point in time that you can decide to review the prices you have. But at the outset, you may even offer some of the products for free for people to taste. Especially when you go on these food fairs. What do we see? We see foods being given for free. That is actually what happened in the case of Ghana. As a budding and fledgling economy, it was somewhat not easier for you to attract the bigwigs in the international investment
Doug, I'm
market.
sorry. I'm very sorry to cut your thoughts. We have Kwame from Kumasi. Hi, Kwame.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Kwame, good morning.
Yes, sir.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm blessed.
Please speak up a bit.
Yeah. I'm good, sir.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, your first caller called identifying some challenges that the economy is facing. Yeah, your first caller called identifying some of the challenges that we are facing.
Yeah.
Repatriation policy.
Transfer policy.
The transfer policy. It talks about 1D, 1F, and all that.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to find out, was the Vice President aware of all these challenges before he made mention of the fact that the dollar has been arrested? I just want to find out. If the Vice President was not aware, why would he make such a serious statement? Because...
All right. Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to find out if the Vice President was aware or he was just playing with the business community.
I believe this is a national discourse, so I don't really want to go into those waters. This is just a national discourse where we're discussing. Anyway, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, so the first caller, to answer quickly the question. So you realize what has happened in time past has been the provision of tax exemptions. You know, especially
why do we do that?
No, as I said initially, it was difficult for the country to attract investors into the country.
So it was a way of
as a way of incentive. So that
but
is
now the investors are coming in.
That is what I'm saying. That's what I said. In marketing, when you produce items for which most people in the market are not familiar, what do? You provide samples for people to taste, and try it. When they appreciate the taste, then now you can begin to price it, and people will not focus on the